No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. Chapter 1. I sent one boy to the gas chamber at Huntsville, one and only one. My arrest and my testimony. I went up there and visited him 2 or 3 times. 3 times. The last time was the day of his execution. I didn't have to go, but I did. I sure didn't want to. He killed a 14-year-old girl, and I can tell you right now I never did have no great desire to visit with him, let alone go to his execution. But I done it. The papers said it was a crime of passion, and he told me there wasn't no passion to it. He'd been dating this girl, young as she was. He was 19, and he told me that he had been planning to kill somebody for about as long as he could remember. Said that if they turned him out, he'd do it again. Said he knew he was going to hell. Told it to me out of his own mouth. I don't know what to make of that. I surely don't. I thought I'd never seen a person like that, and it got me to wondering if maybe he was some new kind. I watched them strap him into the seat and shut the door. He might have looked a bit nervous about it, but that was about all. I really believe that he knew he was going to be in hell in 15 minutes. I believe that. And I've thought about that a lot. He was not hard to talk to. Called me sheriff. But I didn't know what to say to him. What do you say to a man that by his own admission has no soul? Why would you say anything? I've thought about it a good deal, but he wasn't nothing compared to what was coming down the pike. They say the eyes are the windows to the soul. I don't know what them eyes was the windows to, and I guess I'd as soon not know. But there is another view of the world out there, and other eyes to see it, and that's where this is going. It has done brought me to a place in my life I would not have thought I'd have come to. Somewhere out there is a true and living prophet of destruction, and I don't want to confront him. I know he's real. I have seen his work. I walked in front of those eyes once. I won't do it again. I won't push my chips forward and stand up and go out to meet him. I ain't just being older. I wish that it was. I can't say that it's even what you are willing to do, because I always knew that you had to be willing to die to even do this job. That was always true. Not to sound glorious about it or nothing, but you do. If you ain't, they'll know it. They'll see it in a heartbeat. I think it is more like what you are willing to become. And I think a man would have to put his soul at hazard. And I won't do that. I think now that maybe I never would. The deputy left Sugar standing in the corner of the office with his hands cuffed behind him while he sat in the swivel chair and took off his hat and put his feet up and called Lamar on the mobile. Just walked in the door. Sheriff, he had some sort of thing on him, like one of them oxygen tanks for emphysema or whatever. Then he had a hose that run down the inside of his sleeve and went to one of those stun guns like they used on slaughterhouses. Yes, sir. Well, that's what it looks like. You can see it when you get in. Yes, sir. I got it covered. Yes, sir. When he stood up out of the chair, he swung the keys off his belt and opened the locked desk drawer to get the keys to the jail. He was slightly bent over when Sugar squatted and scooted his manacled hands beneath him to the back of his knees. In the same motion he sat and rocked backward and passed the chain under his feet, and then stood instantly and effortlessly. If it looked like a thing he'd practiced many times, it was. He dropped his cuffed hands over the deputy's head and leaped into the air and slammed both knees against the back of the deputy's neck and hauled back on the chain. They went to the floor. The deputy was trying to get his hands inside the chain, but he could not. Sugar lay there, pulling on the bracelets with his knees between his arms and his face averted. The deputy was flailing wildly, and he began to walk sideways over the floor in a circle, kicking over the wastebasket, kicking the chair across the room. He kicked shut the door, and he wrapped the throw rug in a wad about them. He was gurgling and bleeding from the mouth. He was strangling on his own blood. Sugar only hauled the harder. The nickel-plated cuffs bit to the bone. The deputy's right carotid artery burst, and a jet of blood shot across the room and hit the wall and ran down it. The deputy's legs slowed and then stopped. He lay jerking. Then he stopped moving altogether. Sugar lay breathing quietly, holding him. When he got up, he took the keys from the deputy's belt and released himself and put the deputy's revolver in the waist of his trousers and went into the bathroom. He ran cold water over his wrists until they stopped bleeding, and he tore strips from a hand towel with his teeth and wrapped his wrists and went back into the office. He sat on the desk and fastened the toweling with tape from a dispenser, studying the dead man gaping up from the floor. When he was done, he got the deputy's wallet out of his pocket and took the money and put it in the pocket of his shirt and dropped the wallet to the floor. Then he picked up his air tank and the stun gun and walked out the door and got into the deputy's car and started the engine and backed around and pulled out and headed up the road. On the interstate, he picked out a late model Ford sedan with a single driver and turned on the lights and hit the siren briefly. The car pulled onto the shoulder. Sugar pulled in behind him and shut off the engine and slung the tank across his shoulder and stepped out. The man was watching him in the rearview mirror as he walked. "What's the problem, officer?" he said. "Would you mind stepping out of the vehicle?" The man opened the door and stepped out. "What's this about?" he said. "Would you step away from the vehicle, please?" The man stepped away from the vehicle. Sugar could see the doubt come into his eyes at this blood-stained figure before him, but it came too late. He placed his hand on the man's head like a faith healer. The pneumatic hiss and click of the plunger sounded like a door closing. The man slid soundlessly to the ground. A round hole in his forehead from which the blood bubbled and ran down into his eyes, carrying with it slowly uncoupling world vision to see. Sugar wiped his hand with his handkerchief. "I just didn't want you to get blood on the car," he said. Moss sat with his heels of his boots dug into the volcanic gravel of the ridge and glassed the desert below him with a pair of 12-power German binoculars. His hat pushed back on his head, elbows propped on his knees, the rifle strapped over his shoulder with a harness leather sling with a heavy-barreled .270 on a 98 Mauser action with a laminated stock of maple and walnut. It carried an unearthed telescopic sight of the same power as the binoculars. The antelope were a little under a mile away. The sun was up less than an hour, and the shadow of the ridge and the Titila and the rocks fell far out across the floodplain below him. Somewhere out there was the shadow of Moss himself. He lowered the binoculars and sat studying the land. Far to the south, the raw mountains of Mexico, the breaks of the river. To the west, the big terracotta terrain of the running borderlands. He spat dryly and wiped his mouth on the shoulder of his cotton work shirt. The rifle would shoot half a minute of angle groups. 5-inch groups at 1,000 yards. The spot he'd picked to shoot from lay just below a long talus of lava scree, and it would put him well within that distance. Except that it would take the better part of an hour to get there, and the antelope were grazing away from him. The best he could say about any of it was that there was no wind. When he got to the foot of the talus, he raised himself slowly and looked for the antelope. They'd not moved far from where he last saw them, but the shot was still a good 700 yards. He studied the animals through the binoculars, in the compressed air motes and heat distortion, a low haze of shimmering dust and pollen. There was no other cover, and there wasn't going to be any other shot. He wallowed down in the scree and pulled off one boot and laid it over the rocks and lowered the forearm of the rifle down into the leather and pushed off the safety with his thumb and sighted through the scope. They stood with their heads up, all of them, looking at him. "Damn," he whispered. The sun was behind him, so they couldn't very well have seen light reflect off the glass of the scope. They had just flat seen him. The rifle had a Kanger trigger set to 9 ounces, and he pulled the rifle and the boot toward him with great care and sighted again, and jacked the crosshairs slightly up the back of the animal standing most broadly to him. He knew the exact drop of the bullet in 100-yard increments. It was the distance that was uncertain. He laid his finger in the curve of the trigger. The boar's tooth he wore on a gold chain spooled onto the rocks inside his elbow. Even with the heavy barrel and the muzzle brake, the rifle bucked up off the rest. When he pulled the animals back into the scope, he could see them all standing as before. It took the 150-grain bullet the better part of a second to get there, but it took the sound twice that. They were standing, looking at the plume of dust where the bullet had hit. Then they bolted, running almost immediately at top speed upon the barrier, with the long whang of the rifle shot rolling after them, and caroming off the rocks and yawing back across the open country in the early morning solitude. He stood and watched them go. He raised the glasses. One of the animals had dropped back and was packing one leg, and he thought that the round had probably skipped off the pan and caught him in the left hindquarters. He leaned and spat. "Damn," he said. He watched them out of sight beyond the rocky headlands to the south. The pale dust that hung in the windless morning light grew, and then it too was gone. The barrier stood silent and empty in the sun. as if nothing had occurred there at all. He sat and pulled on his boot and picked up the rifle and ejected the spent casing and put it in his shirt pocket and closed the bolt. Then he slung the rifle over his shoulder and set out. It took him some 40 minutes to cross the barrier. From there he made his way up a long volcanic slope and followed the crest of the ridge southeast to an overlook above the country into which the animals had vanished. He glassed the terrain slowly. Crossing the ground was a large tailless dog, black in color. He watched it. It had a huge head and cropped ears, and it was limping badly. It paused and stood. It looked behind it. Then it went on. He lowered the glasses and stood watching it go. He hiked on along the ridge with his thumb hooked in the shoulder strap of the rifle, his hat pushed back on his head. The back of his shirt was already wet with sweat. The rocks there were etched with pictographs perhaps 1,000 years old. The men who drew them hunters like himself. Of them there was no other trace. At the end of the ridge was a rock slide, a rough trail leading down. Candelia and scrub catclaw. He sat in the rocks and steadied his elbows on his knees and scanned the country with the binoculars. A mile away on the floodplain sat 3 vehicles. He lowered the binoculars and looked over the country at large. Then he raised them again. There looked to be men lying on the ground. He jacked his boots into the rocks and adjusted the focus. The vehicles were 4-wheel drive trucks or Broncos with big all-terrain tires and winches and racks of roof lights. The men appeared to be dead. He lowered the glasses. Then he raised them again. Then he lowered them and just sat there. Nothing moved. He sat there for a long time. When he approached the trucks, he had the rifle unslung and cradled at his waist with the safety off. He stopped. He studied the country and then he studied the trucks. They were all shot up. Some of the tracks of holes that ran across the sheet metal were spaced and linear, and he knew they'd been put there with automatic weapons. Most of the glass was shot out and the tires flat. He stood there, listening. In the first vehicle there was a man slumped dead over the wheel. Beyond were 2 more bodies laying in the gaunt yellow grass, dried blood black on the ground. He stopped and listened. Nothing. The drone of flies. He walked around the end of the truck. There was a large dead dog there of the kind he'd seen crossing the floodplain. The dog was gut-shot. Beyond that was the 3rd body laying face down. He looked through the window at the man in the truck. He was shot through the head, blood everywhere. He walked on to the 2nd vehicle, but it was empty. He walked out to where the 3rd body lay. There was a shotgun in the grass. The shotgun had a short barrel, and it was fitted with a pistol stock and a 20-round drum magazine. He nudged the man's boot with his toe and studied the low surrounding hill. The 3rd vehicle was a Bronco with a lifted suspension and dark smoked windows. He reached up and opened the driver's side door. There was a man sitting in the seat looking at him. Moss stumbled back, leveling the rifle. The man's face was bloody. He moved his lips dryly. "Agua, guate," he said. "Agua, por Dios." He had a short-barreled H&K machine pistol with black nylon shoulder strap laying in his lap, and Moss reached and got it and stepped back. "Agua," the man said. "Por Dios." "I ain't got no water." "Agua." Moss left the door open and slung the H&K over his shoulder and stepped away. The man followed him with his eyes. Moss walked around the front of the truck and opened the door on the other side. He lifted the latch and folded the seat forward. The cargo space in the rear was covered with a metallic silver tarp. He pulled it back. A load of brick-sized parcels, each wrapped in plastic. He kept one eye on the man and got out his knife and cut a slit in one of the parcels. A loose brown powder dribbled out. He wet his forefinger and dipped it into the powder and smelled it. Then he wiped his finger on his jeans and pulled the tarp back over the parcels and stepped back and looked over the country again. Nothing. He walked away from the truck and stood and glassed the low hills, the lava ridge, the flat country to the south. He got out his handkerchief and walked back and wiped everything clean that he'd touched, the door handle and the seat latch and the tarp and the plastic package. He crossed around to the other side of the truck and wiped everything down there, too. He tried to think what else he might have touched. He went back to the first truck and opened the door with his handkerchief and looked in. He opened the glove box and closed it again. He studied the dead man at the wheel. He left the door open and walked around to the driver's side. The door was full of bullet holes. The windshield, small caliber, 6mm, maybe number 4 buckshot, the pattern of them. He opened the door and pushed the window button, but the ignition was not on. He shut the door and stood there, studying the low hills. He squatted and unslung the rifle from over his shoulder and laid it in the grass and took the H&K and pushed back the follower with the heel of his hand. There was a live round in the chamber, but the magazine held but only 2 rounds. He sniffed at the muzzle of the piece. He ejected the clip and slung the rifle over one shoulder and the machine pistol over the other and walked back to the Bronco and held up the clip for the man to see. "Otra," he said. "Otra." The man nodded. "In mi bolsa." "You speak English?" He didn't answer. He was trying to gesture with his chin. Moss could see 2 clips sticking out of the canvas pockets of the jacket he was wearing. He reached into the cab and got them and stepped back. Smell of blood and fecal matter. He put one of the full clips into the machine pistol and the other 2 in his pocket. "Agua, guate," the man said. Moss scanned the surrounding country. "I told you," he said. "I ain't got no water." "La puerta," the man said. Moss looked at him. "La puerta. Hay lobos." "There ain't no lobos." Sí. Lobos. Leones." Moss shut the door with his elbow. He went back to the first truck and stood looking at the open door on the passenger side. There were no bullet holes in the door, but there was blood on the seat. The key was still in the ignition, and he reached in and turned it, and then pushed the window button. The glass ratcheted slowly up out of the channel. There were 2 bullet holes in it, and a fine spray of dried blood on the inside of the glass. He stood there thinking about that. He looked at the ground. Stains of blood in the clay, blood in the grass. He looked out down the track south across the caldera, back the way the truck had come. There had to be a last man standing, and it wasn't the Coate and the Bronco begging for water. He walked out on the floodplain and cut a wide circle to see where the track of the tires in the thin grass would show in the sun. He cut for sign 100 feet to the south. He picked up the dead man's trail and followed it until he came to blood in the grass. Then more blood. "You ain't going far," he said. "You may think you are, but you ain't." He quit the track altogether and walked out to the highest ground visible, holding the H&K under his arm with the safety off. He glassed the country to the south. Nothing. He stood fingering the boar's tusk at the front of his shirt. "About now," he said, "you're shaded up somewheres watching your backtrack, and the chances of me seeing you 'fore you see me are about as close to nothing as you can get without falling in." He squatted and studied his elbows on his knees, and with the binoculars swept the rocks at the head of the valley. He sat and crossed his legs and went over the terrain more slowly, and then lowered the glasses and just sat. "Do not," he said, "get your dumb-ass shot out here. Do not do that." He turned and looked at the sun. It was about 11 o'clock. "We don't even know that all this went down last night. It could have been 2 nights ago. It might even could have been 3, or it could have been last night." A light wind had come up. He pushed back his hat and wiped his forehead with his bandana and put the bandana back in the hip pocket of his jeans. He looked across the caldera toward the low range of rocks on the eastern perimeter. "Nothing wounded goes uphill," he said. "It just don't happen." It was a good hard climb to the top of the ridge, and it was close to noon by the time he got there. Far off to the north he could see the shape of a tractor-trailer moving across the shimmering landscape. 10 miles, maybe 15. Highway 90. He sat and swept the new country with the glasses. Then he stopped. At the foot of the rock slide on the edge of the bajada was a small piece of something blue. He watched it for a long time through the binoculars. Nothing moved. He studied the country about. Then he watched it some more. It was a better part of an hour before he rose and started down. The dead man was lying against a rock with a nickel-plated government .45 automatic lying cocked in the grass between his legs. He'd been sitting up and had slid over sideways. His eyes were open. He looked like he was studying something small in the grass. There was blood on the ground and blood on the rocks behind him. The blood was still a dark red, but then it was still shaded from the sun. Moss picked up the pistol and pressed the grip safety with his thumb and lowered the hammer. He squatted and tried to wipe the blood off the grips on the leg of the dead man's trousers, but the blood was too well congealed. He stood and stuck the gun in his belt at the small of his back and pushed back his hat and blotted the sweat from his forehead with his shirt sleeve. He turned and stood studying the countryside. There was a heavy leather document case standing upright alongside the dead man's knee, and Moss absolutely knew what was in the case, and he was scared in a way that he didn't even understand. When he finally picked it up, he just walked out a little ways and sat down in the grass and slid the rifle off his shoulder and laid it aside. He sat with his legs spaced, and the H&K in his lap and the case standing between his knees. Then he reached and unbuckled the two straps and unsnapped the brass latch and lifted the flap and folded it back. It was level full of $100 banknotes. They were in packets fastened with bank tape stamped each with the denomination $10,000. He didn't know what it added up to, but he had a pretty good idea. He sat there looking at it and then closed the flap and sat with his head down. His whole life was sitting there in front of him. Day after day, from dawn till dark, until he was dead, all of it cooked down into 40 pounds of paper in a satchel. He raised his head and looked out across the Bajada. A light wind from the north. Cool. Sunny. 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He looked at the man laying dead in the grass. His good crocodile boots were filled with blood and turning black. The end of his life. Here in this place. The distant mountains to the south. The wind in the grass. The quiet. He latched the case and fastened the straps and buckled them and rose and shouldered the rifle and then picked up the case and the machine pistol and took his bearings by his shadow and set out. He thought he knew how to get to his truck, and he also thought about wandering through the desert in the dark. There were Mojave rattlesnakes in the country, and if he got bit out here at night, he would in all likelihood be joining the other members of the party, and the document case and its contents would then pass on to some other owner. Weighed against these considerations was the problem of crossing open ground in broad daylight on foot with a fully automatic weapon slung across one shoulder and carrying a satchel containing several $1,000,000. Beyond all this was the dead certainty that someone was going to come looking for the money. Maybe several someones. He thought about going back and getting the shotgun with the drum magazine. He was a strong believer in the shotgun. He even thought about leaving the machine pistol behind. It was a penitentiary offense to own one. He didn't leave anything behind, and he didn't go back to the trucks. He set out across country, cutting through the gaps in the volcanic ridges and crossing the flat or rolling country between. Until late in the day he reached the ranch road he'd come down that morning in the dark so long ago. Then in about a mile he came to the truck. He opened the door and stood the rifle on the floor. He went around and opened the driver door and pushed the lever and slid the seat forward and set the case and the machine pistol behind it. He laid the .45 and the binoculars in the seat and climbed in and pushed the seat back as far as it would go and put the key in the ignition. Then he took off his hat and leaned back and just rested his head against the cold glass behind him and closed his eyes. When he got to the highway, he slowed and rattled over the bars of the cattle guard and then pulled out onto the blacktop and turned on the headlights. He drove west towards Sanderson, and he kept to the speed limit every mile of the way. He stopped at the gas station on the east end of town for cigarettes and a long drink of water, and then drove on to Desert Air and pulled up in front of the trailer and shut off the motor. The lights were on inside. "You live to be 100, he said, "and there won't be another day like this one." As soon as he said it, he was sorry. He got his flashlight from the glove box and climbed out and took the machine pistol and the case from behind the seat and crawled up under the trailer. He lay there in the dirt, looking up at the underside of it. Cheap plastic pipe and plywood. Bits of insulation. He wedged the H&K up into a corner and pulled the insulation down over it and lay there thinking. Then he crawled out with the case and dusted himself off and climbed the steps and went in. She was sprawled across the sofa watching TV and drinking a Coke. She didn't even look up. 3 o'clock, she said. "I can come back later." She looked at him over the back of the sofa and looked at the television again. "What have you got in that satchel?" "It's full of money." "Yeah, that'll be the day." He went into the kitchen and got a beer out of the refrigerator. "Can I have the keys?" she said. "Where are you going?" "Get some cigarettes." "Cigarettes?" "Yes, Llewellyn, cigarettes. I've been sitting here all day." "What about cyanide? How are we fixed for that?" "Just let me have the keys. I'll set out in the damn yard and smoke." He took a sip of the beer and went on back into the bedroom and dropped to one knee and shoved the case under the bed. Then he came back. "I got you some cigarettes," he said. "Let me get 'em." He left the beer on the counter and went out and got the 2 packs of cigarettes and binoculars and the pistol and slung the .270 over his shoulder and shut the truck door and came back in. He handed her the cigarettes and went on back to the bedroom. "Where'd you get that pistol?" she called. "At the getting place." "Did you buy that thing?" "No, found it." She sat up on the sofa. "Llewellyn!" He came back in. "What?" he said. "Quit hollering." "What did you give for that thing?" "You don't need to know everything." "How much?" "I told you. I found it." "No, you never done no such a thing." He sat on the sofa and put his legs up on the coffee table and sipped the beer. "It don't belong to me," he said. "I didn't buy no pistol." "You better not of." She opened one of the packs of cigarettes and took one out and lit it with the lighter. "Where have you been all day?" "Went to get you some cigarettes." "I don't even want to know. I don't even want to know what all you been up to." He sipped the beer and nodded. "That'll work," he said. "I think it's better just to not even know even." "You keep running that mouth and I'm going to take you back there and screw you." "Big talk." "Just keep it up." That's what she said. "Just let me finish this beer. You'll see what she said and what she didn't say." When he woke up, it was 1:06 by the digital clock on the bedside table. He lay there looking at the ceiling, the raw glare of the vapor lamp outside bathing the bedroom in a cold and bluish light, like a winter moon, or some other kind of moon. Something stellar and alien in its light that he'd come to feel comfortable with. Anything but sleep in the dark. He swung his feet from under the covers and sat up. He looked at her naked back, her hair on the pillow. He reached and pulled the blanket up over her shoulder and got up and went into the kitchen. He took the jar of water from the refrigerator and unscrewed the cap and stood there drinking in the light of the open refrigerator door. Then he just stood there holding the jar with the water beating cold on the glass, looking out the window and down the highway toward the lights. He stood there for a long time. When he went back to the bedroom, he got his shorts off the floor and put them on and went into the bathroom and shut the door. Then he went through into the second bedroom and pulled the case from under the door and opened it. He sat on the floor with the case between his legs and delved down into the bills and dredged them up. The packets were 20 deep. He shoved them back down into the case and jostled the case on the floor to level the money, times 12. He could do the math in his head. 2.4 million, all used bills. He sat looking at it. "You have to take this seriously," he said. "You can't treat it like luck." He closed the bag and redid the fasteners and shoved it under the bed and rose and stood looking out the window at the stars over the rocky escarpment into the north of the town. Dead quiet. Not even a dog. But it wasn't the money that he woke up about. "Are you dead out there?" he said. "Hell no, you ain't dead." She woke while he was getting dressed and turned in the bed to watch him. "Llewellyn?" "Yeah." "What are you doing?"
"Getting dressed."
"Where are you going?"
"Out."
"Where are you going, baby?"
"Something I forgot to do. I'll be back."
"What are you going to do?" He opened the drawer and took the .45 out and ejected the clip and checked it and put it back and put the pistol in his belt. He turned and looked at her. "I'm fixing to go do something dumber in hell, but I'm going anyways. If I don't come back, tell Mother I love her." "Your mother's dead, Llewellyn."
"Well, I'll tell her myself then."
She sat up in the bed. "You're scaring the hell out of me, Llewellyn. Are you in some kind of trouble?"
"No. Go to sleep."
"Go to sleep?"
"I'll be back in a bit."
"Damn you, Llewellyn." He stepped back into the doorway and looked at her.
"What if I was not to come back? Is them your last words?"
She followed him down the hallway to the kitchen, pulling on her robe. He took an empty gallon jug from under the sink and stood filling it at the tap. "Do you know what time it is?" she said.
"Yeah, I know what time it is."
"Baby, I don't want you to go." "Where are you going?" "I don't want you to go."
"Well, darling, we're eye to eye on that, 'cause I don't want to go neither. I'll be back. Don't wait up on me."
He pulled in at a filling station under the lights and shut off the motor and got the survey map from the glove box and unfolded it across the seat and sat there studying it. He finally marked where he thought the truck should be, and then he traced a route cross country back to Harkle's cattle gate. He had a good set of all-terrain tires on the truck and 2 spares in the bed, but this was some hard country. He sat looking at the line he'd drawn. Then he bent and studied the terrain and drew another one. Then he just sat there looking at the map. When he started the engine and pulled out onto the highway, it was 2:15 in the morning, the road deserted, the truck radio in this outland country dead even of static from one end of the band to the other. He parked at the gate and got out and opened it and drove through it and got out and closed it again and stood listening to the silence. Then he got back into the truck and drove south on the ranch road. He kept the truck in 2-wheel drive and drove in second gear.
The light of the unrisen moon before him spread out along the dark, placard hills like scrim lights in a theater, turning below where he'd parked that morning onto what may have been an old wagon band that bore eastward, across Harkle's land. When the moon did rise, it sat swollen and pale and ill-formed among the hills to light up all the land about, and he turned off the headlights of the truck. A half hour on, he parked and walked out along the crest of a rise and stood looking over the country to the east and to the south. The moon up, a blue world. Visible shadows of clouds crossing the floodplain, hurrying on the slopes. He sat in the skybuck with his boots crossed before him. No coyotes, nothing. For a Mexican dope dealer, yeah, well, everybody is something. When he got back to the truck, he left the trace and steered by the moon. He crossed under a volcanic headland at the upper end of the valley and turned south again. He had a good memory for country. He was crossing terrain he'd scouted from the ridge earlier that day, and he stopped again and got out to listen. When he came back to the truck, he pried the plastic cover from the dome light and took the bulb out and put it in the ashtray. He sat with the flashlight and studied the map again. When next he stopped, he shut off the engine and sat with the window down. He sat there for a long time. He parked the truck a half mile above the upper end of the caldera and got the plastic jug of water out of the floor and put the flashlight in his hip pocket. Then he took the .45 off the seat and shut the door quietly with his thumb on the latch button and turned and set off towards the trucks. They were as he'd left them, hunkered down on their shot-out tires. He approached with the .45 cocked in his hand. Dead quiet. Could be because of the moon. His own shadow was more company than he would have liked. Ugly feeling out here. A trespasser among the dead. "Don't get weird on me," he said. "You ain't one of 'em. Not yet." The door of the Bronco was open. When he saw that, he dropped to one knee. He set the water jug on the ground. "You dumbass," he said. "Here you are, too dumb to live." He turned slowly, skylighting the country. The only thing he could hear was his heart. He made his way to the truck and crouched by the open door. The man had fallen sideways over the console, still trussed in the shoulder belt, fresh blood everywhere. Moss took the flashlight from his pocket and shrouded the lens in his fist and turned it on. He'd been shot through the head. No Lobos, no Leones. He shone the hooded light into the cargo space between the seats. Everything gone. He switched off the light and stood. He walked out slowly to where the other bodies lay. The shotgun was gone. The moon was already a quarter ways up. All but day bright. He felt like something in a jar. He was halfway back up the caldera to his truck when something made him stop. He crouched, holding the cocked pistol across his knee. He could see the truck in the moonlight at the top of the rise. He looked off to one side of it to see it the better. There was someone standing beside it. Then they were gone. "There is no description of a fool," he said, "that you fail to satisfy. Now you're going to die." He shoved the .45 into the back of his belt and set off at a trot for the lava ridge. In the distance, he heard a truck start. Lights came on at the top of the rise. He began to run. By the time he got to the rocks, the truck was halfway down the caldera, the lights bobbing over the bad ground. He looked for something to hide behind. No time. He lay face down with his head between his forearms in the grass and waited. Either they'd seen him or they hadn't. He waited. The truck went by. When it was gone, he rose and began to clamber up the slope. Halfway up, he stopped and stood, sucking air and trying to listen. The lights were somewhere below him. He couldn't see them. He climbed on. After a while, he could see the dark shapes of the vehicles down there. Then the truck came back up the caldera with the lights off. He lay flattened against the rocks. A spotlight went skittering over the lava and back again. The truck slowed. He could hear the engine idling. The slow lope of the cam. Big block engine. The spotlight went over the rocks again. "It's all right," he said. "You need to be put out of your misery. Be the best thing for everybody." The engine revved slightly and idled down again. Deep guttural tone to the exhaust. Cam and headers and God knows what else. After a while, it moved on in the dark. When he got to the crest of the ridge, he crouched and took the .45 out of his belt and uncocked it and put it back again and looked out to the north and to the east. No sign of the truck. "How would you like to be out there in your old pickup trying to outrun that thing?" he said. Then he realized he would never see his truck again. "Well," he said, "there's lots of things you ain't going to see again." The spotlight came on again at the head of the caldera and moved across the ridge. Moss lay on his stomach watching. It came back again. "If you knew there was somebody out here afoot that had $2 million of your money, at what point would you quit looking for him?" "That's right. There ain't no such point." He lay listening. He couldn't hear the truck. After a while he rose and made his way down the far side of the ridge, studying the country, the floodplain out there, broad and quiet in the moonlight. No way to cross it, and nowhere else to go. "Well, Bubbo, what are your plans now? It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Do you know where your darling boy's at? I'll tell you what. Why don't you just get in your truck and go on out there and take the son of a bitch a drink of water?" The moon was high and small. He kept his eye on the plain below as he climbed along the slope. "How motivated are you?" he said. "Pretty damn motivated." "You better be." He could hear the truck. It came from the foreland head of the ridge with the lights off and started down the edge of the floodplain in the moonlight. He flattened himself in the rocks. In addition to other bad news, his thoughts ran to scorpions and rattlesnakes. The spotlight kept rowing back and forth across the face of the ridge, methodically. Bright shuttle, dark loom. He didn't move. The truck crossed to the other side and came back, tooling along in second gear, stopping, the motor loping. He'd pushed himself forward to where he could see it better. Blood kept running into his eye from the cut on his forehead. He didn't even know where he'd gotten it. He wiped his eye with the heel of his hand and wiped his hand on his jeans. He took out his kerchief and pressed it to his head. "You could head south to the river." "Yeah, you could. Less open ground. Less ain't none." He turned, still holding the handkerchief to his forehead. "No cloud cover in sight. You need to be somewhere come daylight. Home and bed would be good." He studied the blue floodplain out there in the silence, a vast and breathless amphitheater. Waiting. He'd had this feeling before, in another country. He'd never thought he'd have it again. He waited a long time. The truck didn't come back. He made his way south along the ridge. He stood and listened. Not a coyote. Nothing. By the time he descended out onto the river plain, the sky to the east carried the first faint wash of light. It was the darkest this night was going to get. The plain ran to the breaks of the river, and he listened one last time, and then he set out at a trot. It was a long trek, and he was still some 200 yards from the river when he heard the truck. A raw gray light was breaking over the hills. When he looked back, he could see the dust against the new skyline, still the better part of a mile away. In the dawn quiet, the sound of it no more sinister than a boat on the lake. Then he heard it downshift. He pulled the .45 from his belt so that he wouldn't lose it and set out at a dead run. When he looked back again, it had closed a good part of the distance. He was still 100 yards from the river, and he didn't know what he'd find when he got there. A sheer rock gorge. The first long panes of light were standing through a gap in the mountains to the east and fanning over this country before him. The truck was ablaze with lights, roof rack and bumper spots. The engine kept racing away into a howl where the wheels left the ground. "They won't shoot you," he said. "They can't afford to do that." The long crack of a rifle went caroming out over the pan. What he'd heard whisper overhead, he realized was the round passing and vanishing toward the river. He looked back, and there was a man standing up out of the sunroof, one hand on the top of the cab, the other cradling a rifle upright. When he reached the river, it made a broad sweep out of canyon and carried down past great stands of carrizo cane. Downriver it washed up against a rock bluff and then bore away to the south, darkness deep in the canyon. The water dark. He dropped into the cut and fell and rolled and rose and began to make his way down a long sandy ridge toward the river. He hadn't gone 20 feet before he realized that he had no time to do that. He glanced back once at the rim and then squatted and shoved himself off down the side of the slope, holding the .45 before him in both hands. He rolled and slid a good ways, his eyes almost shut against the dust and sand he was plowing up, the pistol clutched to his chest. Then all that stopped and he was simply falling. He opened his eyes, the fresh world of morning above him, turning slowly. He slammed into a gravel bank and gave out a groan. Then he was rolling through some sort of rough grass. He came to a stop and lay there on his stomach, gasping for air. The pistol was gone. The pistol was gone. He crawled back through the flattened grass until he found it and picked it up and turned to scan the rim of the river breaks above him, whacking the pistol barrel across his forearm to shake out the dirt. His mouth was full of sand. His eyes. He saw two men appear against the sky, and he cocked the pistol and fired at them, and they went away again. He knew he didn't have time to crawl to the river, and he just rose and made a run for it, splashing across the braided gravel flats and down a long sandbar until he came to the main channel. He got out his keys and his billfold and buttoned them into his shirt pocket. The cold wind blowing off the water smelled of iron. He could taste it. He threw away the flashlight and lowered the hammer on the .45 and shoved it into the crotch of his jeans. Then he shucked off his boots and pulled them inside his belt upside down at either side and tightened the belt as far as he could pull it and turned and dove into the river. The cold took his breath. He turned and looked back toward the rim, blowing and backpedaling through the slate-blue water. Nothing there. He turned and swam. The current carried him down into the bend of the river and hard up against the rocks. He pushed himself off. The bluff above him rose dark and deeply cupped, and the water in the shadows was black and choppy. When he finally spilled out into the tailwater and looked back, he could see the truck parked at the top of the bluff, but he couldn't see anyone. He checked to see that he still had his boots and the gun, and then turned and began to stroke for the far shore. By the time he dragged himself shivering out of the river, he was the better part of a mile from where he'd gone in. His socks were gone, and he set out at a jog barefoot toward the standing cane. Round cups in the shelving rock where the ancients had ground their meal. When he looked back again, the truck was gone. Two men were trotting along the high bluff, silhouetted against the sky. He was almost to the cane when it rattled all about him, and there was a heavy whump and then the echo of it from across the river. He was hit in the upper arm by a buckshot, and it stung like a hornet. He put his hand over it and dove into the cane, the lead ball half buried into the back of his arm. His left leg kept wanting to give out beneath him, and he was having trouble breathing. Deep in the break, he dropped to his knees and knelt there, sucking air. He undid his belt and let the boots drop into the sand and reached down and got the .45 and laid it to one side and felt the back of his arm. The buckshot was gone. He unbuttoned his shirt and took it off and pulled his arm across to see the wound. It was the shape of a buckshot, bleeding slightly, pieces of shirt fiber packed into it. The whole back of his arm was already becoming an ugly purple bruise. He wrung the water out of his shirt and put it on again and buttoned it and pulled on the boots and stood and buckled his belt. He picked up the pistol and took the clip out of it and ejected the round from the chamber and then shook the gun and blew through the barrel and reassembled it. He didn't know if it would fire or not, but he thought it probably would. When he came out of the cane on the far side, he stopped to look back, but the cane was 30 feet high, and he couldn't see anything. Downriver was a broad bench of land and a stand of cottonwoods. By the time he got there, his feet were already beginning to blister from walking barefoot in the wet boots. His arm was swollen and throbbing, but the bleeding seemed to have stopped, and he walked out into the sun on a gravel bar and sat there and pulled off the boots and looked at the red raw sores of his heels. As soon as he sat down, his leg began to hurt again. He unsnapped the small leather holster at his belt and got out his knife, and then stood up and took off his shirt again. He cut off the sleeves at the elbow and sat and wrapped his feet in them, and pulled on the boots. He put the knife back in the holster and fastened it, and picked up the pistol and stood and listened. A red-winged blackbird. Nothing. As he turned to go, he heard the truck very faintly on the far side of the river. He looked for it, but he couldn't see it. He thought that by now probably the two men had crossed the river and were somewhere behind him. The trunk silted up from the high water and the roots tangled among the rocks. He took off his boots again to try to cross the gravel without leaving any tracks, and he climbed a long and rocky rincon toward the south rim of the river canyon, carrying the boots and the wrappings and the pistol and keeping an eye on the terrain below. The sun was in the canyon, and the rocks he'd crossed would dry in minutes. At a bench near the rim, he stopped and lay on his belly with his boots in the grass beside him. It was only another 10 minutes to the top, but he didn't think he had 10 minutes. On the far side of the river, a hawk set forth from the cliffs, whistling thinly. He waited. After a while, a man came out of the cane upriver and paused and stood. He was carrying a machine gun. A second man emerged below him. They glanced at one another and then came on. They passed below him, and he watched them out of sight down the river. He wasn't really even thinking about them. He was thinking about his truck. When the courthouse opened at 9 o'clock Monday morning, someone was going to be calling in the vehicle number and getting his name and address. This was some 24 hours away. By then they would know who he was, and they would never stop looking for him. Never, as in never. He had a brother in California. He was supposed to tell what? "Arthur, there's some old boys on their way down there to see you who propose to lower your balls between the jaws of a 6-inch mechanist vise and commence cranking on the handle a quarter turn at a time, whether you know where I'm at or not. You might want to think about moving to China." He sat up and wrapped his feet and pulled the boots on and stood and started up the last stretch of the canyon to the rim. Where he crested out, the country lay dead flat, stretching away to the south and to the east, red dirt and creosote. Mountains in the far and middle distance. Nothing out there. Heat shimmer. He stuck the pistol in his belt and looked down at the river one more time and then set out east. Langtree, Texas was 30 miles as the crow flies. Maybe less. 10 hours. 12. His feet were already hurting. His leg hurt. His chest. His arm. The river dropped away behind him. He hadn't even taken a drink. Chapter 2. I don't know if law enforcement work is more dangerous now than what it used to be or not. I know when I first took office, you'd have a fist fight somewheres, and you'd go to break it up, and they'd offer to fight you. And sometimes you had to accommodate 'em. They wouldn't have it no other way. And you'd better not lose, neither. You don't see that so much no more. But maybe you see worse. I had a man pull a gun on me one time, and it happened that I grabbed it just as he went to fire, and the plunger on the hammer went right through the fleshy part of my thumb. You can see the mark of it there. But that man had every intention of killing me. A few years ago, and it wasn't that many neither, I was going out one of these little 2-lane blacktop roads of a night, and I come up on a pickup truck that they was 2 boys settin' in the bed of. They kindly blinked in the lights, and I backed off some, but the truck had Coahuila plates on it, and I thought, well, I need to stop these old boys and take a look. So I hit the lights, and whenever I done that, I seen the slider window in the back of the cab open, and here comes somebody passing a shotgun out the window to the old boy setting in the bed of the truck. I'll tell you right now, I hit them brakes with both feet. It skidded the unit sideways to where the lights was going out into the brush, but the last thing I seen in the bed of the truck was the old boy putting that shotgun to his shoulder. I hit the seat, and I had just hit it when here come the windshield all over me and them little bitty pieces they break up into. I still had one foot on the brake, and I could feel the cruiser sliding into the bar ditch, and I thought it was going to roll, but it didn't. It filled the car just full of dirt. The old boy, he opened up on me twice more, and shot out all the glass on one side of the cruiser, and then I'd come to a stop, and I laid there in the seat. Had my pistol out, and I heard the pickup leave out, and I raised up and fired several shots at the taillights, but they was long gone. Point being, you don't know what all you're stopping when you do stop somebody. You take out on the highway. You walk out to a car, and you don't know what you're liable to find. I sat there in that cruiser for a long time. The motor had died, but the lights was still on. Cab full of glass and dirt. I got out and kindly shook myself off, and got back in and just sat there, just kindly collecting my thoughts. Windshield wipers hanging on the dashboard. I turned off the lights, and I just sat there. You take somebody that will actually throw down on a law enforcement officer and open fire, you have got some very serious people. I never saw that truck again. Nobody else did neither. Or not them plates no ways. Maybe I should have took off after 'em. Or tried to. I don't know. I drove back to Sanderson and pulled in at the cafe, and I'll tell you, they came from all over to see that cruiser. It was just shot full of holes. Looked like the Bonnie and Clyde car. I didn't have a mark on me. Not even from all that glass. I was criticized for that, too, parking there like I done. They said I was showing out. Well, maybe I was, but I needed that cup of coffee, too, I'll tell you. I read the papers every morning. Mostly, I suppose, just to try and figure out what might be heading this way. Not that I've done all that good of a job of heading it off. It keeps getting harder. Here a while back, they was 2 boys run into one another, and one of 'em was from California, and one from Florida, and they met somewheres or other in between, and then they set out together traveling around the country killing people. I forget how many they did kill. Now, what are the chances of a thing like that? Them two had never laid eyes on one another. There can't be many of them, I don't think. Well, we don't know. Here the other day, there was a woman put her baby in a trash compactor. Who would think of such a thing? My wife won't read the papers no more. She's probably right. She generally is. Bell climbed the rear steps of the courthouse and went down the hall to his office. He swiveled his chair around and sat and looked at the telephone. Go ahead, he said. I'm here. The phone rang. He reached and picked it up. Sheriff Bell, he said. He listened. He nodded. Mrs. Downey, I believe he'll come down directly. Why don't you call me back here in a little bit? Yes, ma'am. He took off his hat and put it on the desk and sat with his eyes closed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Yes, ma'am, he said. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Downey, I haven't seen that many dead cats in the trees. I think he'll come down directly if you just leave him be. You call me back in a little bit, you hear? He hung the phone up and sat looking at it. It's money, he said. You have enough money you don't have to talk to people about cats and trees. Well, maybe you do. The radio squawked. He picked up the receiver and pushed the button and put his feet on the desk. Bell, he said. He sat listening. He lowered his feet to the floor and sat up. Get the keys and look in the turtle. That's all right. I'm right here. He drummed his keys on the desk. All right. Keep your lights on. I'll be there in 50 minutes. And Torbert, shut the trunk. He and Wendell pulled onto the paved shoulder in front of the unit and parked and got out. Torbert got out and was standing by the door of his car. The sheriff nodded. He walked along the edge of the roadway, studying the tire tracks. You seen this, I reckon, he said. Yes, sir. Well, let's take a look. Torbert opened the trunk and they stood looking at the body. The front of the man's shirt was covered in blood, partly dried. His whole face was bloody. Bell leaned and reached into the trunk and took something from the man's shirt pocket and unfolded it. It was a blood-stained receipt for gas from a service station in Junction, Texas. Well, he said, this was the end of the road for Bill Work. Didn't look to see if he'd had a billfold on him. That's all right. He don't. This here was just dumb luck. He studied the hole in the man's forehead. Looks like a .45, clean, almost like a wad cutter. What's a wad cutter? It's a target round. You got the keys? Yes, sir. Bell shut the trunk lid. He looked around. Passing trucks on the interstate were downshifting as they approached. I've already talked to Lamar. Told him he can have the unit back in about 3 days. Called Austin. They're looking for you first thing in the morning. I ain't loading him into one of our units, and he damn sure don't need a helicopter. You take Lamar's unit back to Serona when you get done, and call me or Wendell. One will come and get you. You got any money? Yes, sir. Fill out the report, same as any report. Yes, sir. White male, late 30s, medium build. How do you spell Werrick? You don't spell it. We don't know what his name is. Yes, sir. You might have a family someplace. Yes, sir. Sheriff? Yes. What do we have on the perpetrator? We don't. Give Wendell your keys before you forget it. They're in the unit. Well, let's not be leaving keys in the units. Yes, sir. I'll see you in 2 days' time. Yes, sir. I hope that son of a bitch is in California. Yes, sir. I know what you mean. I got a feeling he ain't. Yes, sir. I do, too. Wendell, you ready? Wendell leaned and spat. Yes, sir, he said. I'm ready. He looked at Torbert. You get stopped with the old boy and the turtle. Just tell him you don't know nothing about it. Tell him somebody must have put him in there while you was having coffee. Torbert nodded. You and the sheriff going to come down and get me off death row? If we can't get you out, we'll get you in there with you. You all don't be making light of the dead that way, Bell said. Wendell nodded. Yes, sir, he said. You're right. I might be one myself one day. Driving out 90 toward the turnoff at Dryden, he came across a hawk dead in the road. He saw the feathers move in the wind. He pulled over and got out and walked back and squatted on his boot heels and looked at it. He raised one wing and let it fall again. Cold, yellow-eyed, dead to the blue vault above them. It was a big red tail. He picked it up by one wing-tip and carried it to the bar ditch and laid it in the grass. They would hunt the blacktop. Sitting on the high power poles and watching the highway in both directions for miles. Any small thing that might venture to cross, closing on their prey against the sun, shadowless. lost in the concentration of the hunter. He wouldn't have the trucks running over it. He stood there looking out across the desert, so quiet, low hum of wind in the wires, high bloodweeds along the road, wiregrass and saccawista. Beyond in the stone arroyos, the tracks of dragons, the raw rock mountains shadowed in the late sun, and to the east the shimmering abscissa of the desert plains under a sky where rain curtains hung dark as soot all along the quadrant. That god lives in silence who has scorned the following land with salt and ash. He walked back to the cruiser and got in and pulled away. When he pulled up in front of the sheriff's office in Serona, the first thing he saw was the yellow tape stretched across the parking lot. A small courthouse crowd. He got out and crossed the street. "What's happened, Sheriff?" "I don't know," said Bell. "I just got here." He ducked under the tape and went up the steps. Lamar looked up when he tapped at the door. "Come on in, Ed Tom," he said. "Come in. We got hell to pay here." They walked out on the courthouse lawn. Some of the men followed them. "You'll go on now," said Lamar. "Me and the sheriff here need to talk." He looked haggard. He looked at Bell, and he looked at the ground. He shook his head and looked away. "I used to play mumbly-peg here when I was a boy. Right here. These youngsters today, I don't think would even know what that was. Ed Tom, this is a damned lunatic." "I hear you." "You got anything to go on?" "Not really." Lamar looked away. He wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeve. "I'll tell you right now, this son of a bitch will never see a day in court. Not if I catch him, he won't." "Well, we need to catch him first." "That boy was married." "I didn't know that." 23 years old. Clean-cut boy, straight as a die. Now I gotta go out to his house before his wife hears it on the damn radio. I don't envy you that. I surely don't. I think I'm gonna quit, Ed Tom. You want me to go out there with you?" "No, I appreciate it. I need to go." "All right. I just have a feeling we're looking at something we really ain't never seen here before." "I got the same feeling. Let me call you this evening." "I appreciate it." He watched Lamar across the lawn and climbed the steps to his office. "I hope you don't quit," he said. "I think we're going to need all of you we can get." When they pulled up in front of the cafe, it was 1:20 in the morning. There was only 3 people on the bus. "Sanderson," the driver said. Moss made his way forward. He'd seen the driver eyeing him in the mirror. "Listen," he said, "do you think you could let me out down at the Desert Air? I got a bad leg, and I live down there, but I got nobody to pick me up." The driver shut the door. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." When he walked in, she got up off the couch and ran and put her arms around his neck. "I thought you was dead," she said. "Well, ain't so. Don't go to slobbering." "I ain't. Why don't you fix me up some bacon and eggs while I take a shower?" "Let me see that cut on your head. What happened to you? Where's your truck at?" "I need to take a shower. Fix me up something to eat. My stomach thinks my throat's been cut." When he came out of the shower, he was wearing a pair of shorts. And when he sat at the little formica table in the kitchen, the first thing she said was, "What's that on the back of your arm? How many eggs is that?" "4. You got any more toast?" "There's 2 more pieces coming. What is that, Llewellyn?" "What would you like to hear?" "The truth." He sipped his coffee and set about salting his eggs. "You ain't going to tell me, are you?" "Nope." "What happened to your leg?" "It's broke out in a rash." She buttered the fresh toast and put it on the plate and sat in the chair opposite. "I like to eat breakfast of a night," he said. "Takes me back to my bachelor days." "What's going on, Llewellyn?" "Here's what's going on, Carla Jean. You need to get your stuff packed and be ready to roll out of here come daylight. Whatever you leave, you ain't ever going to see again. And if you want it, don't leave it. There's a bus leaves out here at 7:15 in the morning. I want you to go to Odessa and wait there till I can call you." She sat back in the chair and watched him. "You want me to go to Odessa?" she said. "That's correct." "You ain't kidding, are you?" "Me? No, I ain't kidding a bit. Are we out of preserves?" She got up and got the preserves out of the refrigerator and set them on the table and sat back down. He unscrewed the jar and ladled some onto his toast and spread it with his knife. "What's in the satchel you brought in?" "I told you what was in the satchel." "You said it was full of money." "Well, then I reckon that's what's in it." "Where's it at?" "Under the bed in the back room." "Under the bed?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can I go back there and look?" "You're free, white, and 21, so I reckon you can do whatever you want." "I ain't 21. "Well, whatever you are." And you want me to go on a bus and go to Odessa? You are getting on a bus and going to Odessa. What am I supposed to tell Mama? Well, try standing in the door hollering, Mama, I'm home. Where's your truck at? Going the way of all flesh. Nothing's forever. How are we supposed to get down there in the morning? Call Miss Rosa over yonder. She ain't got nothing to do. What have you done, Llewellyn? I robbed a bank at Fort Stockton. You're a lying sack of you-know-what. If you ain't going to believe me, what you asked me for? You need to go on back there and get your stuff together. We got about 4 hours till daylight. Let me see that thing on your arm. You done seen it. Let me put something on it. Yeah, I think there's some buckshot salve in the cabinet if we ain't out. Will you go on and quit aggravating me? I'm trying to eat. Did you get shot? No. I just said that to get you stirred up. Now go on now. He crossed the Pecos River just north of Sheffield, Texas, and took Route 349 south. When he pulled into the filling station at Sheffield, it was almost dark. A long red twilight with doves crossing the highway heading south toward some ranch tanks. He got change from the proprietor and made a phone call, filled the tank, and went back in and paid. You all getting any rain up your way? Said the proprietor. Which way would that be? I seen you was from Dallas. Sugar picked his change up from the counter. What business is it of yours, where I'm from? Friendo. I didn't mean nothing by it. You didn't mean nothing by it. I was just passing the time of day. I guess that passes for manners in your cracker view of things. Well, sir, I apologized. If you don't want to accept my apology, I don't know what else I can do for you. How much are these? Sir? I said, how much are these? 69 cents. Sugar unfolded $1 onto the counter. The man rang it up and stacked the change before him the way a dealer places chips. Sugar hadn't taken his eyes from him. The man looked away. He coughed. Sugar opened the plastic package of cashews with his teeth and doled a third part of them into his palm and stood eating. Will there be something else? The man said. I don't know. Will there? Is there something wrong? With what? With anything. Is that what you're asking me? Is there something wrong with anything? The man turned away and put his fist in his mouth and coughed again. He looked at Sugar and he looked away. He looked out the window at the front of the store. The gas pumps and the car sitting there. Sugar ate another small handful of cashews. Will there be anything else? You've already asked me that. Well, I need to see about closing. See about closing? Yes, sir. What time do you close? Now. We close now. Now is not a time. What time do you close? Generally around dark. At dark. Sugar stood slowly chewing. You don't know what you're talking about, do you? Sir? I said you don't know what you're talking about, do you? I'm talking about closing. That's what I'm talking about. What time do you go to bed? Sir? You're a bit deaf, aren't you? I said, what time do you go to bed? Well, I'd say around 9:30, somewhere around 9:30. Sugar poured more cashews into his palm. I could come back then, he said. We'll be closed then. That's all right. Why would you be coming back? We'll be closed. You said that. Well, we will. You live in that house behind the store? Yes, I do. You lived here all your life? The proprietor took a while to answer. This is my wife's father's place, he said, originally. You married into it? We lived in Temple, Texas for many years. Raised a family there. In Temple. We come out here about 4 years ago. You married into it. If that's the way you want to put it. I don't have some way to put it. That's the way it is. Well, I need to close now. Sugar poured the last of the cashews into his palm and wadded the little bag and placed it on the counter. He stood oddly erect, chewing. You seem to have a lot of questions, the proprietor asked. For somebody that don't want to say where it is they're from. What's the most you've ever lost on a coin toss? Sir? I said, what's the most you ever lost on a coin toss? Coin toss? Coin toss. I don't know. Folks don't generally bet on a coin toss. It's usually more like just to settle something. What's the biggest thing you ever saw settled? I don't know. Sugar took a 25-cent piece from his pocket and flipped it, spinning into the bluish glare of the fluorescent light overhead. He caught it and slapped it onto the back of his forearm just above the bloody wrappings. Call it, he said. Call it? Yes. For what? Just call it. Well, I need to know what it is we're calling here. How would that change anything? The man looked at Sugar's eyes for the first time, blue as lapis, at once glistening and totally opaque, like wet stones. You need to call it, Sugar said. I can't call it for you. It wouldn't be fair. It wouldn't even be right. Just call it. I didn't put nothing up. Yes, you did. You've been putting it up your whole life, you just didn't know it. You know what the date is on this coin? No. It's 1958. It's been traveling 22 years to get here, and now it's here, and I'm here. And I've got my hand over it, and it's either heads or tails, and you have to say, call it. I don't know what it is I stand to win. In the blue light, the man's face was beaded thinly with sweat. He licked his upper lip. You stand to win everything, Sugar said. Everything. You ain't making any sense, mister. Call it. Heads, then. Sugar uncovered the coin. He turned his arm slightly for the man to see. Well done. He picked the coin from his wrist and handed it across. What do I want with that? Take it. It's your lucky coin. I don't need it. Yes, you do. Take it. The man took the coin. I gotta close now, he said. Don't put it in your pocket. Sir? Don't put it in your pocket. Where do you want me to put it? Don't put it in your pocket. You won't know which one it is. All right. Anything can be an instrument, Sugar said. Small things. Things you wouldn't even notice. They pass from hand to hand. People don't pay attention. And then one day, there's an accounting. And after that, nothing is the same. Well, you say, it's just a coin, for instance. Nothing special there. What could that be an instrument of? You see the problem? To separate the act from the thing, as if the parts of some moment in history might be interchangeable with the parts of some other moment. How could that be? Well, it's just a coin. Yes, that's true. Is it? Sugar cupped his hand and scooped his change from the counter into his palm and put the change in his pocket and turned and walked out the door. The proprietor watched him go, watched him get into the car. The car started and pulled off from the gravel apron onto the highway south. The lights never did come on. He laid the coin on the counter and looked at it. He put both hands on the counter and just stood leaning there, with his head bowed. When he got to Dryden, it was 8 o'clock. He sat at the intersection in front of Condra's feed store, with the lights off and the motor running. Then he turned the lights on and pulled out on Highway 90 headed east. The white marks at the side of the road where he found them looked like surveyor's marks, but there was no numbers, just the chevrons. He marked the mileage on the odometer, and drove another mile and slowed and turned off the highway. He shut off the lights and left the motor running, and got out and walked down and opened the gate and came back. He drove across the bars of the cattle guard, and got out and closed the gate again, and stood there listening. Then he got in the car and drove out down the rutted track. He followed a south-running fence, the Ford wallowing over the bad ground. The fence was just an old remnant, 3 wires strung on mesquite posts. In a mile or so he come out on the gravel pit, where a Dodge Ram Charger was parked facing toward him. He pulled slowly alongside it and shut down the engine. The Ram Charger's windows were tinted so dark they looked back. Sugar opened the door and got out. A man got out on the passenger side of the Dodge and folded the seat forward and climbed into the rear. Sugar walked around the vehicle and got in and shut the door. Let's go, he said. Have you talked to him? Said the driver. No. You don't know what's happened? No. Let's go. They rolled out across the desert in the dark. When do you aim to tell him? The driver said. When I know what it is I'm telling him. When they came to Moss's truck, Sugar leaned forward to study it. Is that his truck? That's it. Plates is gone. Pull up here. Have you got a screwdriver? Look in the jockey box there. Sugar got out with the screwdriver and walked over to the truck and opened the door. He pried the aluminum inspection plate off of the rivets inside the door and put it in his pocket and came back and got in and put the screwdriver back in the glove box. Who cut the tires? He said. Wasn't us. Sugar nodded. Let's go, he said. They parked some distance from the trucks and walked down to look at them. Sugar stood there a long time. It was cold out on the barrio, and he had no jacket. But he didn't seem to notice. The other 2 men stood waiting. He had a flashlight in his hand, and he turned it on and walked among the trucks and looked at the bodies. The 2 men followed at a small distance. Whose dog? Sugar said. We don't know. He stood looking at the dead man slumped across the console of the Bronco. He shone the light into the cargo space behind the seats. Where's the box? He said. It's in the truck. You want it? Can you get anything on it? No. Nothing. Not a bleep. Shigur studied the dead man. He jostled him with his flashlight. These are some right petunias, one of the men said. Shigur didn't answer. He backed out of the truck and stood looking over the Bajada in the moonlight. Dead quiet. The man in the Bronco had not been dead 3 days or anything like that. He pulled the pistol from the waistband of the trousers and turned around to where the 2 men were standing and shot them once each through the head in rapid succession and put the gun back in his belt. The second man had actually half turned to look at the first as he fell. Shigur stepped between them and bent and pulled away the shoulder strap from the second man and swung up the 9mm Glock he'd been carrying and walked back out to the vehicle and got in and started it and backed around and drove up out of the caldera and back toward the highway.